Hey, welcome to day 8, and this is pollination and the role of bees. We'll delve into the important role bees play in pollinating flowers, crops, plants, and how this impacts our environment. It is through pollination that plants are fertilized and are able to produce the next generation of plants, including the fruit and crops we eat. But not all plants need pollinators, as they get by with wind pollination alone or self-pollination. But for the majority of plants in our beautiful blue orb in the Milky Way, without pollinators, the ecosystem would decline while the food chain breaks down. Here's where bees contribute to food security across the globe. Welcome to BeeWareOnline. Today, we're exploring the vital role of bees in pollination. Bees are some of nature's most hard-working creatures. Every day they travel kilometers, or depending on where you're sipping on a coffee or drinking a beer while watching this video, a number of miles of terrain searching for nectar, collecting pollen along the way. Don't forget water and odds for making propolis. We will cover what propolis is in a later episode. This process of gathering and transferring pollen is known as pollination, and it is essential for the propagation of many plants and crops. How does it work? When a bee lands on a flower, the pollen from the flower stamen sticks to the bee's body. As the bee moves from flower to flower, the pollen is transferred from one flower stigma to the other. This process of transferring the pollen is what allows plants to reproduce and create seeds. Without bees, many plants and crops would just not survive. We would have to do hand pollination. Full disclosure, there are such things as self-pollinating and wind-pollinated plants. Barley and hops are two such crops, so that beer you might have been drinking or are gonna have later did not benefit from any bees. But that coffee, however, was definitely visited by honeybees if it is made from the rustica coffee bean. Not the Arabica, however, which is also self-pollinating. But, having said that about coffee, bees love coffee plants and are attracted to the caffeine in the coffee flower's nectar. It is not just coffee beans that contain caffeine, their flowers also contain caffeinated nectar. This nectar is very attractive for bees, and caffeine makes busy bees as alert as it does humans. In fact, it is estimated that over 70% of the world's food supply relies on pollination. That's why it's so important that we protect the world's bee population, and by all rights their pollinator cousins too. By planting flowers that attract bees, providing clean, safe water sources, and avoiding the use of pesticides, we can help bees keep healthy and the pollination process thriving. Not to mention our entire food chain and thus life on this planet. So next time you see a bee, take a moment to appreciate the important role they play in keeping our planet healthy. But is that all there is to pollination? Not really. If you hang in there, it's a bit of a long one, but here we go. I'm going to explain to you that proper pollination can improve the quantity and quality of fruits, nuts, oils, and other crops produced. Even biodiversity itself is improved. Many people mistake that bees use pollen to make honey, believe it or not, when in fact it is nectar from flowers that they collect that is then turned into honey and not pollen. Bees may visit about 100 flowers in the foraging season and do anywhere from 10 to 15 trips in a day depending on the weather. Whenever a bee is collecting from a flower, it could be gathering nectar or pollen or water. Foraging bees do collect sap too. Honeydew is also a rarer food source they collect from a few plants that have aphids feeding on them. Like the psychedelic honey I mentioned in episode 6, there's a rare case for producing honeydew honey which is collected by bees from aphids, not the flowers. A Belha moth produces such aphid honey, honeydew honey, in Mozambique by one of my long-standing customers, Steve. But are all plants created equal then for bees? Well, plants are different. Each tree, crop, weed and flower has a range of both nectar and pollen qualities. For example, in South Africa, Aloe daviana, which flowers in August, is the strongest indigenous provider of both nectar and pollen for Highveld bees in and around the old Transvaal, now Gauteng province and surrounds. It's rated 4 out of 4 for both nectar and pollen quality and strength, which is phenomenal for bees. They actually go moggy on it. It's like bees on steroids. But whereas maize or mealies have very poor pollinative value for honeybees, sunflowers may offer a good source. There are only a few crops that are fully dependent on bees, which is Brazil nuts, almonds, fruits including kiwi, pumpkins, watermelon and melons, and cocoa beans. Also vanilla and quinces fall into this list. However, more recently GMOs which are genetically modified organisms, have been developed that no longer produce pollen and or include insecticides or pesticides that can pass on through the pollen as well. A study showed that there is a lack of adverse effects of Bt cryoproteins on both larval and adult honeybees, which is consistent with prior studies on the activity, spectrum, and mode of action of different classes of Bt cryoproteins, which is a built-in pesticide. However, unfortunately, few of these studies have reported any performance measures other than survival, and this prevented the researchers from conducting separate analyses on these aspects of performance. So what this means is that very little has been done to test adverse effects on the development and the health of bees over significant time in the field. It also points to the fact that the sponsor of that research in this particular case was actually Monsanto, who probably don't want to have any adverse impact of performance and life development of bees to be found to be impacted or affected by the very pesticides that they are cutting into the GMOs as well. So do GMOs have pesticides in them? The vast majority of genetically modified organisms grown in the US are engineered to produce their own pesticides or survive direct application of pesticides. For example, Monsanto's Roundup Ready crops are engineered to survive direct application of glyphosate, which is the primary ingredient in Roundup, if you didn't know. So on the 6th of September 2011, the EU Court of Justice has ruled that products containing pollen derived from GMOs actually have to be considered the same as foodstuff produced from GMOs and cannot be sold without prior authorization. So what do you guys think about that? Put your comments in the comment section below about that one. But here are the 10 most common GMO products. What are they? Soy. Of all crops, soy is the most heavily modified. Corn is next, or maize and mealies is one of the most heavily modified crops too. Some rices, potato, tomato, canola, papaya, beets or beetroots, and cotton have been heavily genetically modified over the last 30-40 years. But what are the top crops impacted by declining pollinator populations, but directly that of honeybees especially? So the top crops affected by declining bee populations are crops like apples, cranberries, melons, almonds, and broccoli. Fruits like blueberries and cherries are 90% dependent on honeybee pollination, like apples, blueberries, pumpkins, and watermelon. And then watermelons, cantaloupes, cucumbers, pumpkins, eggplants, hot peppers, and gourds all must have bees to pollinate them. Otherwise you don't get any produce out of it and no yield, or very, very little yield. But local is lacquer, so here's a quick short list of our best pollen and honey sources in the SADC region, South African Development Community or countries. And that's the aloe davion and the halfveld as mentioned earlier, the fynbos in the Cape, red river gum, sunflower, and alfalfa. That's a short list, but it's pretty potent. But here's a case for pollination as a business service best known in the US. This is looking at it from a beekeeper providing a pollination service to a farmer. Alright, so almonds in the USA, 90% of almonds require pollination by honeybees. That's one of about 20 odd crops fall in the same boat, and you can grab copies of the individual pollination reports from practicalbeekeeping.com. But this case involves the largest modern transfer of bees anywhere in the world. Over 1 million colonies get moved to California to ensure the world's largest and almost only serious producer of almonds gets pollinated. That's over 1 million colonies, not 1 million bees. Right? You got me? So the cost per hive to pollinate starts from about $165 a hive. That's reported prices in 2019 on average. 2022 prices were up to $195 a hive. There's 2 hives per acre ratio. Flowering time is about 4 weeks. And costs to move there and staff to load and offload are not included in that price. Obviously, you have to take that off of your profits. Machinery you need to load and offload, you need to process any honey that you might get, you need the trucks and the transport and drivers, and the total value to US beekeepers, this is before these costs are involved, it's $240 million for about a 5 to 6 week period, because you're going to need a week of prep beforehand, at least a week beforehand, and then a week to 2 weeks after as well. The California almond crop is worth $2.2 billion and is estimated to add an additional 21.5 billion to the economy via 100,000 jobs in production, processing, manufacturing and marketing. Notably, this multi-billion-dollar industry is more or less completely reliant on managed honeybees, since pollination is required to produce almonds. And there are almost no wild bees in California almond orchards. This isn't just a service for almond growers, it's also big business for beekeepers. The average rental fee paid by almond growers is currently about $195 per colony. If you do the maths, that means a total revenue received by United States beekeeping providing pollination services to almonds is more than $240 million per year, as stated earlier. For the South African pollination market, there's huge potential for farmers and growers to boost their production yield and fruit sets by teaming up with beekeepers that are experienced at supplying pollination services. And here's a short list, of crops that will benefit in South Africa. Onion seed producers, avocado growers, mango, lychee, orange and lemon, or the citrus industry basically, watermelon, apples, canola, sunflower, macadamians. By the by, I did talks with the Macadamian Growers Association in 2010 about the benefits of bee pollination in Nelspruit. For more details on specific bee-dependent crop reports detailing how many hives per hectare are required to be the most beneficial, the flowering times, the best models to use, and placement of hives within orchards or farmlands, visit www.practicalbeekeeping.com. But moving on from there, a study also found that bees that were scent trained, in other words, they were trained to smell effectively, pollinate sunflowers, boosted seed production up to 57%, and that was a study conducted in 2020. So a lot of research has been done on the effects and impact of honeybees and other pollinators like bumblebees and butterflies on the improved yield and quality of produce experienced. Yet many farmers and grower associations have yet to incorporate it into their business model as agronomists. They tend to favor fertilizer and glyphosate. South African pollination rates in 23 vary from 550 Rand per hive to 1200 Rand a hive at production quality. What makes a hive production quality is that the brood chamber must have 8 frames with drawn comb on it and respective colony workers to go with it. So why the difference in rates? So factors vary. The price between crops, distance to be traveled, the time of year the bees are required to pollinate. Bees have a productive cycle throughout the year, with winter being a dearth and summer being a natural peak. However, in between this macro or large seasonal cycles of feast and famine, there are also times of micro dearth periods where food is less available as access to anything presently flowering within 1.5 kilometers or about a mile is the most economical distance for foragers to fly without breaking even on the cost of resources such as food and energy with the amount actually collected. So hence, beekeepers are at times required to substitute energy supply by way of feeding sugar water, which carries a hefty price tag, or they need to move the bees. Traveling distance plays a part with regards to vehicle hire or ownership. The fuel costs, toll gates, maintenance, driver costs adds to the operational cost too. Staff to load and place hundreds of thousands of hives overnight, again to offload at the target site, repeat when the pollination cycle is complete. The price of the underlying crop, fruit or vegetable also determines pricing factors with growers due to the impact and benefit that has been found that bees will have on it. So as there are different impacts on the outcome of using honeybees to pollinate, depending on the crops involved, their contribution is also varied in ratio. Macadamia pollination, although valuable, is proven to improve nut set and yield by between 12 to 15%, which isn't bad, but it's not the best. Whereas on a sunflower crop, for example, for a seed grower, the same honeybee pollinators are proven to increase yield by up to as much as 57%, but at the least an average of 25 to 40%. So it stands to reason that the sunflower grower is much more likely to pay a premium for the honeybee pollination services than one that perhaps is farming macadamia nuts. But then again, the macadamian farmer for his 12 to 15% may end up getting a hell of a better improvement in profit and margin over a sunflower grower that may get a lot less per ton, for example. In closing, pollination works well for both beekeepers and farmers when they partner up. And knowledge is power here, guys. It Awareness is our mission, so I invite you to become a bee ambassador and let's spread the word and benefits of combining honeybees with crops to boost their yield and food security around the country and the planet. But that's it for today. It's a long one, so if you've made it this far, thanks, and check out our references and links in the description below. Click that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and thank you for watching and sharing. Ciao for now.